Our notes for today are going to start on page 47. Our notes for today are going to start on page 47, and today we are talking about cells. So the first thing that you need to know is that all living things are made of cells. And that's a rule that we have known before. The next thing is that all cells contain water. And they also contain biomolecules. And then the third rule is that all cells are made of structures that allow the cell to function. And these structures are normally made of biomolecules. So they might contain one type of biomolecule, like maybe they're just a protein, or maybe they contain fats and proteins, or maybe they contain fats and proteins and carbohydrates. But those structures that make the cell up, those are made out of biomolecules. So now you need your different cell diagrams. The first one we're going to use is this one. This is from a bacteria cell. And the first type of cell that we're going to be talking about are called prokaryotes. And prokaryotes, these are the most simple of cells. They tend to be bacteria. But when we say that they're simple, what we mean is that they have no membrane-bound organelles. Specifically, they don't have a nucleus, and the nucleus is the part of our cells that contains the DNA. So while they have DNA, the DNA is not stored in a nucleus. And so none of the internal components of the cells have their own membrane. The nucleus is surrounded by a membrane. But in these cells, they're really simple, and they don't have those internal structures that are surrounded by a membrane. Another thing that you should know about them is that these organisms are unicellular. So unicellular means that they are made of one cell. So you are multicellular, you are made of multiple cells working together. These organisms are unicellular, they have only one cell that makes up their whole body. And then the last thing is that they have two types of DNA. They have chromosomal DNA, and their chromosomal DNA is circular. And they have plasmid DNA. So two things about this are different than our DNA. So we also have chromosomal DNA. All organisms have chromosomal DNA. but our chromosomal DNA is in straight lines. Sometimes we view them as these X's, and they are not circular. So this organism here, this is the chromosomal DNA, and you can see that it's actually one big circle. I can keep following it around forever because it is circular, and that is different than our chromosomal DNA. The other thing is that they have plasmid DNA, and plasmid DNA are these extra bits of DNA that are also circular, but they're much smaller, and they contain extra genes that the organism doesn't actually need to survive. Sometimes they do give it a survival advantage. So for example, maybe it makes them resistant to an antibiotic, so an antibiotic that you could take wouldn't actually kill it, but it wouldn't actually need that to survive its everyday activities. It would only need that if you took an antibiotic and it was infecting you. So those extra bits of DNA are not necessarily needed for survival. We don't have plasmid DNA. Plasmid DNA is super cool because plasmid DNA allows us to actually genetically modify these things. So we can take an extra bit of DNA here, a plasmid DNA, and we can put the gene for human insulin in it, and then we can put that inside of bacteria, and then the bacteria will start making human insulin. And that's really helpful for anybody that's diabetic because it means that we can give them insulin. All right, now these are prokaryotes, and this word here, the pro part means before and the karyo part means egg. So when people were first looking at cells in a microscope, they could only see big cells, like cells from plants or cells from animals. And those large cells have a nucleus, and they look sort of like an egg, like a soft-boiled egg that has the white on the outside and then the yolk, which is what was the nucleus. And that's what people were seeing when they looked through the microscope. Then, as microscopes got better, they were able to see these even smaller organisms, and that's where our bacteria come into play. So they're even smaller than plant and animal cells. And they are what developed before the egg cells. So the ones that looked like an egg are more advanced, and the ones that were before the eggs, these are the more basic cells that developed first. So our example here is a bacteria cell. So I'm going to write here example. Bacteria. And then I'm going to tape in this so that I can write on it. So I'm going to tape it all the way down, and I'm going to try and add as little tape as possible. And it looks like I have grabbed some double-sided tape. So you should just tape it down like we normally would, but I am going to use double-sided tape because that's what I grabbed. And we're going to tape it in like this. Okay, so let's label the things that we have now. So first I'm going to go ahead and label the DNA that we talked about. So we talked about this DNA here. This is that chromosomal DNA. And that is something that everything has. But then we also have this plasmid DNA. And that is going to be unique to our prokaryotes. The next thing we have in here are our ribosomes. And these are these dots that you can see. And ribosomes are super important because they make proteins. So proteins are made of amino acids, and the ribosome's job is to actually put the amino acids together in a specific order that will make each type of protein. So here's a ribosome here. Here's another ribosome. And that's another one of those things that all cells have. So your cells have ribosomes, plant cells have ribosomes. The next thing that we are going to label is our cell membrane. So there are actually two outer edges here, and the inside outer edge is the cell membrane. And the cell membrane has a really specific job. It's going to control what goes into and out of the cell. So some things can go right through the cell membrane. So for example, we've talked about how water and oxygen and carbon dioxide might have to come into or out of the cell. Those are going to be able to go right through the cell membrane. But bigger things like our monomers, like our glucose or our amino acids, those have to get through this cell membrane, and the cell membrane can actually open and close openings that will allow those things in or out depending on what the cell needs. So that is a cell membrane, and all cells also have a cell membrane. So at this point I'm going to add some information here. I'm going to put a star next to the things that all cells have, and I'm going to write a note at the bottom here. All cells have these components. Oops. So if it has a star, it's not unique to our prokaryotes. Plasmid DNA, unique to prokaryotes, so no star for that. All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about is the cell wall. And the cell wall is this outer layer. And the cell wall is something that plants have as well. So animals don't have a cell wall, but bacteria and plants have a cell wall. And the purpose of the cell wall is that it provides structure. So that's like shape and support to the cell. And that's going to be really important for our plants and for our bacteria. So it doesn't get a star because animal cells don't have a cell wall, but it's also not unique to our bacteria or our prokaryotes here because it is also found in our plants. All right, there's only a couple more things that we need to talk about. We need to talk about this weird tail-like thing. This weird tail-like thing is called a flagella. And it provides movement. And it really does work like a tail or a whip, and a bacteria cell can have one of these. It could have 100 of them all over around the cell, and it will move back and forth, and that will allow bacteria to sort of swim. There's one animal cell that has a flagella, and that is a sperm cell. And a sperm cell is actually mostly flagella because its whole purpose is to swim and find an egg. All right, last but not least, we have this stuff that's inside of the cell, and it's not just water. It is a special substance called cytoplasm. And cytoplasm is a gel-like fluid. So it is mostly water. but it actually is a little bit thicker than water, and it is what everything sort of floats around in the cell. And you don't want everything to just sort of float to one side or float to another side. So it has to be a little bit thicker than water, and that's going to keep everything kind of nicely spaced and floating around inside the cell. And everything has cytoplasm, so we're going to give that a star as well. So these are our prokaryotes, and all of the structures that have stars are things that are found in prokaryotes and in our plant and animal cells, which are called eukaryotes.